Okay, moving in now to our Florida State Georgia Tech preview. Know this game is going to be played in Dublin, Ireland. Should be an exciting one. You can watch it noon Eastern time on ESPN. Overall thoughts here. 13th time that Georgia Tech will face a top 10 Florida State team. The Seminoles have won the last 11 meetings, but in 2015, they lost on a game-winning blocked field goal that was returned for a touchdown as time expired. That was actually Georgia Tech's last win against a top 10 opponent. They have since lost 15 straight. Georgia Tech's coming off their first bowl appearance since 2018. They beat UCF in the Gasparilla Bowl, so they have not reached a bowl game in consecutive seasons since reaching 18 straight from 1997 to 2014. Florida State coming off an ACC title, but a lot of new faces there for Mike Norvell. Mike Norvell, he's constantly utilized the transfer portal. Has not been something that's been new to him since 2020. Florida State has brought in 67 transfers. The only Power 5 team that has more without a coaching change are the Ole Miss Rebels. And we all know that Lane Kiffin is the portal king. The biggest, most notable transfer for Mike Norvell, I guess figuratively and literally, DJ Uiagalelei now comes in. He's one of 17 transfers that Mike Norvell brought in this season. 10 guys off last year's team were drafted in the NFL draft, so they had to reinforce some of those departures with key contributors that can step right in and play. DJ Uiagalelei, though, if you look back at his time at Clemson, it's viewed somewhat negatively, but that's mostly because of what he did or didn't do back in 2021. If you look at his performance in 22, it's actually pretty admirable. Granted, got replaced at the end of the season by Cade Klubnik, but it wasn't a bad year. I mean, he went 11-2 as a starting quarterback. He also, I think, did a pretty good job of having a QBR of 64, averaged almost 200 yards a game, had 22-7 touchdown interception ratio. Last year, he just built on that. At 2023 at Oregon State, he was 8-4. He had an 81 total QBR, threw for 220 a game, and had touchdown interception of 21-7. So he's been progressing as a player in each of the last 3 years as a starting quarterback. Now, on the other side, the quarterback that he'll be going up against, also a transfer from Texas A&M, Haynes King, is back to lead the Georgia Tech offense. Really, really fast, okay? But what he showed last year is that he's pretty dang good throwing the football as well. He led the ACC in passing touchdowns, had 27. He also added 10 on the ground, so those 37 touchdowns that he was responsible for was the most in the ACC and tied for 8th in the FBS last year. He's not alone offensively. They bring back basically their entire offensive core in 2024. Haynes King's back, their leading passer. Their leading rusher, Jamal Haynes, is back, and their top 2 leading receivers from last year, Eric Singleton and Malik Rutherford, are all back. So Georgia Tech is one of 4 ACC teams to do that, along with Virginia Tech and Stanford and SMU. Georgia Tech returns 83% of their offensive production from 2023. That is 9th in the college football world. Some of the keys here. Some of the biggest keys are very obvious, okay? First and foremost, Georgia Tech's biggest Achilles heel last year was stopping the run. And we know what they're going to be up against. Mike Norvell and how they scheme the run's amazing. We know that Lawrence Toafili is going to see an increased role as one of the featured backs. We know Roydell Williams transferred over from Alabama, but Toafili and Roydell Williams, I think they complement each other really nicely. Toafili is very versatile. Roydell's really a one-cut back that wants to get downhill. And we know that Toafili, he's even played Wildcat in the past. It's a really solid group. 1-2 punch that is dynamic. And they're going against a defense that has a new defensive coordinator in Tyler Santucci. He transfers over from Duke. They're going to be implementing that 4-2-5 scheme. He was with Mike Elko as the DC there at Duke, so that's going to bring in a new system and one that is challenging for the opposing quarterback, but traditionally has been very sound against the run. They need it because Georgia Tech last year was among the worst in the country against the run. They gave up 221 rushing yards per game. That was 130th. They gave up 5.4 yards per rush. That was 130th. And they gave up 88 rushes of 10 plus yards. That was 132nd. Remember, there's only 133 FBS teams. So you take that into account, they were one of the worst in the sport against the run. They're going to have to be better, and they have beefed things up with some impact transfers from the Power Four, but will they be good enough to slow down what should be an excellent rushing attack? Question and key number 2. Can Florida State protect DJ Uiagalelei? When DJ gets hit, when DJ gets fooled, that's when things get a little bit sideways. Tyler Santucci and Duke and Mike Elko's system that Santucci's now implemented at Georgia Tech is a very difficult system to play against. They can play with your eyes, they can overload your protections, and they can force you to throw in places where they want you to throw, which means the quarterback's going to have to be really, really smart. But it's hard to be smart when you don't have a lot of time to diagnose what the defense is doing. So if Florida State can protect DJ Uiagalelei, that will go a long way in making their passing game successful. We know they have the personnel up front, tons of experience back on the offensive line, but if you can hit DJ Uiagalelei, if you can pressure him, if you can get guys unblocked going at him, his adjusted completion percentage and his turnover-worthy plays go up drastically. So keep an eye on that. The problem is Yellow Jackets front seven talked about some of the transfer portal additions that they made. New defenses basically to eliminate big plays. And they have guys up front that should be decent against the run with what they've added, but there's not really anyone on the front that is an above average or a high level pass rusher that we know about at this moment. So can they do it without bringing additional pressure? Because that could put their back end in a bit of a liability for those big plays that DJU likes to lean on. The other question is, can Florida State stop the run? Because if there's one thing that Georgia Tech does extremely well, is that they run the football. All right, last year, they averaged 204 rushing yards a game. That was first in the ACC. They averaged 5.5 yards a carry. That was first. They had 85 carries of 10-plus yards. That was first. And they had 24 rushing touchdowns. That was sixth. So this is one of the best rushing attacks in the entire country. And there's a bunch of pieces back for Florida State, but there are some new pieces that are playing increased roles, and they did lose some real difference makers along the defensive line last year, like Jared Verse. They had Patrick Payton back. They had Farmer back. They have Darrell Jackson back. We talked about him a little bit earlier, so they should be in a good spot up front, but there are question marks at the second level as well, where they have a bunch of guys that departed the program from a year ago. Can Florida State stop the run? That is question number 3. And then finally, can Georgia Tech avoid the obvious passing situations? We know that when Georgia Tech is on schedule and when they run the football, they're going to be in a great spot. But if they get behind the sticks, if they have an incompletion, if they take a sack, that's when Florida State is one of their best. They were 6th in the FPS last year and opponents' third down conversion. They are really good at rushing the quarterback. Really, really good at rushing the quarterback. So watch those defenders on the edges of the defense. Marvin Jones, Patrick Payton, those two guys breathe fire. And if they know a pass play is coming, you can expect them pinning their ears back and coming after the quarterback with unbelievable intensity. So Georgia Tech's going to have to be really good on first and second down to avoid those obvious passing situations. Some trends in the game. As you know, if you're new to the show, we always give you a couple trends. Do with them what you wish. It's your choice. The Yellow Jackets were 7-2 against the spread last year as an underdog. Florida State won the last meeting by 41-16. That was when they were a 23-point favorite. Brent Key at that point was still the interim head coach. But prior to that, where Florida State covered, Georgia Tech actually covered 7 straight against Florida State. Georgia Tech is 4-0 straight up and against the spread against ranked ACC foes last year. They pulled upsets over Pitt, North Carolina twice, and Miami. And Georgia Tech is 10-5 against the spread against ACC foes under Brent Key. They're getting double digits here. So all that being said, I think Florida State handles their business, but I think it will be a very competitive game. Florida State ultimately starts the season 1-0, but don't be surprised if it's a 4-quarter contest. And at some point, it's a little stressful for the Seminoles.